Hello, 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 and welcome to Lunch and Live. I'm so excited to be here with you today. My name is Michelle Smith from Delightful Infusion, the key to positive change. And we are going to get started with our Lunch and Live. Before we get into the topic, I just want to call your attention to what you see on the screen, which is actually the handout. If you registered for the Zoom meeting for this meeting, you have this in your email. So what I want to do is just go over it real quick, just to point a couple of things out. And then we will go ahead into our topic. This meeting is being recorded. I will go ahead and speak on the topic, and then I'll turn off the recording. And if there are any questions or any comments or any feedback or anything you want to discuss after that, we can certainly do that. I look forward to that. I do see we have participants on the Zoom. We are also live in the Delightful Infusion group on Facebook. And so I want to welcome all those who are watching this live in the Delightful Infusion group. If you did register for this ahead of time, you do have this handout in your email. And this is just the first page of the handout, but we just want to welcome you. I just want to welcome you and say, let's have lunch. This is your weekly infusion of positivity, faith, information, encouragement, and joy. Come with an expectation of goodness, grace, and growth, and that is exactly what you will find. I do want to call your attention to, of course, we always give you a nice little outline of what we're going to be talking about today, but I want to call your attention to the part of the handout that says Spotlight You. This part of the handout is something you can use if you want to take notes while I'm talking. We're going to be talking about an important topic today, grief and loss. And so we do have a nice little graphic here about grief and loss. And this sheet is your personal sheet to take notes, to coach yourself. It's an opportunity to coach yourself and to write down what you feel is important from today's Delightful Infusion. I also want to call your attention to a coaching program. We highlight a coaching program every Lunch and Live. One of our coaching programs is called the Mary Coaching Program. It's a 4-week God esteem building program. Basically, it's designed to build your faith in God. We do believe at Delightful Infusion that having a healthy God esteem will help you handle situations in life like grief and loss and all the other things that come along in life. So that is in your handout. We're not going to go over it, but I wanted to call your attention to the Mary program, which is enrolling now, and we would love to have you in that program. All right, ladies, we're going to go ahead and get right into the subject of grief and loss. I'm actually going to stop share because I want to just be able to talk directly to you. And so what we're going to do, let's see here, I'm going to change my view. And we're just going to go ahead and talk with you about this topic. This is such an important topic. And I'll tell you, grief and loss might not quite be the topic that you might expect for a Lunch and Live. After all, this is your weekly infusion of positivity, faith, information, encouragement, and joy, right? And so we're going to do this and we're going to talk about grief and loss. And why are we talking about it? It's because what I have found is that light shines brightest in darkness, and faith is most powerful when it pushes out fear. Encouragement is felt more deeply and is more effective when things feel at their worst. And so this is, to me, a perfect time to inject some delightful infusion on this topic. You see, God has impressed upon me for quite some time the need to address this topic of grief and loss. I admit I avoided it at first because it seemed like such a heavy subject. Today, though, that avoidance ends. Why? Because Jesus Christ is the answer to all that humans face. That is my belief, and that is what I know for sure. In this day and age, really, there has what was a popular view? It was a popular view that Jesus Christ is the answer for all the things in life today. But what was a popular view in society has now become controversial. So many have turned their back on God. There's so much violence in the world today. Mental health crises and negative outcomes are on the rise. As a business person, it now takes courage to stand up for Christian faith. And in fact, I was told that if I offered a faith-based coaching to the business community and held forth the idea that Jesus Christ is the answer, I would alienate 90% of my customer base. But people are seeking answers. The pandemic has caused more grief and loss in such a short period of time than we have seen in decades. War and social unrest have caused uncertainty and fear. People grieve not only the loss of a loved one, but the loss of societal norms we all took for granted, like getting together with loved ones without fear of a life-threatening or life-altering disease. Jobs have been lost, and many are making unprecedented decisions about their futures. And these decisions are decisions they may or they may not regret. I think we all know what it means to suffer a loss, but let's define today what is meant by grief. Here's the dictionary definition. Grief is a noun. It is keen mental suffering or distress over affliction or loss. It is sharp sorrow, painful regret, a cause or an occasion of keen distress or sorrow. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who was a Swiss-American psychiatrist, came up with a 5-stage model of grief in 1969. Now, this model has become well known and respected and has been used extensively in grief counseling. The 5 stages of grief are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Studies show, though, that people can bounce back and forth between these stages while processing grief. When you think about grief and all that comes along with it, you can ask yourself, in all this, where is hope? Where is relief? Where is peace? Especially in this day and age. Well, we can begin to answer these questions, and we answer them with scripture. Revelation 21, 4 and 5, it says, "And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away." And he that sat upon the throne said, "Behold, I make all things new." And he said unto me, "Write, for these words are true and faithful." These words are true and faithful. That phrase is your delightful infusion for today. The words of God are true and faithful. The Bible is a source of keys to positive change. The business world, the political world, the entertainment world, the scientific community, and the church does well to heed its wisdom. Its author is well acquainted with grief. He said so in his word. Isaiah 53, 3 through 5. "He is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And we hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he hath borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed." When I read that, and that is in Isaiah 53, 3 through 5 in the King James Version, when I read that scripture, I said, Isn't that what's happening today? Isn't that exactly what is happening in society today? He is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and we hid, as it were, our faces from him. In society, he is despised and not esteemed. So many methodologies, philosophies, ideologies have just rejected God. But surely he had borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. But we have to remember, we have to recall that he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and it's with his stripes we are healed. And this is how we can handle grief and loss, because we have to remember that God cares about every tear that we shed. We have to remember, he said in Psalms 56:8, in the NLT version, you keep track of all my sorrows. You have collected all my tears in your bottle. You have recorded each one in your book. Jesus desires to comfort us in our grief. You are not alone. I'm going to be continuing with a series on grief and loss in future Lunch and Live meetings. And if you know someone that needs encouragement in this area, invite them to attend. You know, I write about grief and loss in my book, Understanding the Role of Suffering and Rising Above the Pain. I wrote this book back in the year 2005. And when I first wrote it, I shopped it around to be published. But what I was told was, oh, people are not interested in understanding the role of suffering. They're interested in things like enlarging their coasts. And, you know, the prayer of Jabez was very popular at that time. But I can tell you that people have been so encouraged by this book. And I want to take a minute, because we have a little time, and I just want to read you an excerpt from this book. Because I talk about grief and loss in this book, and I talk about things that I've been through with grief and loss. And I've had experiences since 2005 dealing with grief and loss. But I just want to read you a little excerpt from this book before we close and take questions. This is a personal testimony. It was Sunday, November 14th, 1993. My parents, my fiance, his parents, and siblings arrived at the church. There was joy, anticipation, and happiness in the air. Over 6.5 years of friendship, fellowship, and love were going to be celebrated on this day. I handed the ushers little cards to pass out to the congregation. The cards said, "You are cordially invited to witness a joyous event in the lives of our children, Michelle Olivia Young and Perry Miller. Immediately following morning service, Mr. and Mrs. Oliver Young and Mrs. Dorothy Miller. The date to remember, June 11th, 1994. I was getting married. I had been saved since the young age of 15 and had finished high school and college. At 24 years old, I was looking forward to sharing my life with the man I loved. I met Perry in my senior year of high school. He was kind, handsome, and strong. And in time, he began attending my church. He was a Marine reservist, a wonderful cook, an artist, a clothing designer, and a sensitive man with a hearty laugh and a handsome smile. He worked faithfully with the young people, the prison ministry, and labored on local and national levels in our church organization. We sang in the same choir, and in the fullness of time, we fell in love. 6 years and 8 months after we first met, we went up in front of the church to announce our engagement. The morning of Monday, December 20th, 1993, started much like any other day. I got up and went to work. They were having a Christmas party on the job, but for some reason, I didn't feel much like socializing. I got some food and went back to my desk to sit down to work. There I sat, all by myself. I didn't feel my usual bubbly self, but I shrugged it off and continued going about my day. That evening, when I got home, I received a phone call. My wedding invitations were ready. I just needed to come and pick them up. I was in the middle of the phone call when my parents asked me to put down the phone because they needed to talk to me. I came into my parents' room and sat down on their bed. My mother sat on my left and my father sat on my right. My mother then told me something terrible had happened to Perry. They said that he had had a massive heart attack that morning. The news got me to my feet. Okay, let's go to the hospital, I said, but nobody moved. I said, come on, let's go. Let's go. He's all right, isn't he? Tell me he's all right. My mother then told me Perry had gone to be with the Lord. Now, nothing I had been through up until that time and nothing I've gone through since can compare to the suffering I experienced through that trial. My whole world turned upside down. All of my plans, hopes, and dreams were shattered. The direction my life was moving in had been halted. Suddenly, unexpectedly, I was in shock. I was numb. Surely this was a dream. Surely this was a horrible nightmare. Any moment now, I would wake up and call my soon-to-be husband and tell him all about this. I expected him to walk in at any time so I could tell him this preposterous story that people had been telling me about him dying of a heart attack. As the days passed, however, it became clear that the dream was reality. And so I write about this time of grief and loss in my book and what that grief and that loss, the role that it played really in my relationship with God and in building that strength to handle that tragic loss. I was so young and I had never been through anything like that prior to that time. But as I sit here today, I can tell you right now that I have come to the understanding that there's a role for suffering. There's a role that grief and loss plays in our lives. And if we hold on to faith in God, He will get us through our grief and our loss. If it's something that you're going through right now today, I can tell you from experience, because I've experienced it since then more than once. I lost my beloved father in 2017. And God got me through that as well. And so the delightful infusion that I want to leave with you was encapsulated in that section of Revelation where it said, these words are true and faithful. And I can tell you that God is His word. He is His word. They're one and the same. God is true and faithful, and He will get you through your grief and your loss. As we go forward with future delightful infusions, future lunch and lives, I will be talking about the stages of grief. I will be talking a little bit more about how you can rise above that pain. Again, my name is Michelle Smith from Delightful Infusion, the key to positive change. And this has been your Lunch and Live. Thank you for being here today. And we're looking forward to next Thursday's Lunch and Live.